All right. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this session on the Corporate Transparency Act. My name is Ian Carlstrom. I'm with the Minnesota SBDC. SBDCs are a nationwide network of business consultants, coaches, and specialists. We have about 1,000 centers across the country, and we serve about 1 million entrepreneurs every year, from startups all the way throughout the life of the business at no cost to our clients. Before we get started today, I just want to introduce a couple of our collaborative partners. We've got Chris Irwin and Paul Smith from our office in North Dakota on the line here with us. And we've also got Kurt McSparron from the Executives Club, a Fargo Moorhead-based club for business owners. Would you guys mind taking a moment to introduce yourself? Start with Kurt.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Yeah, I'm Kurt McSparron with the Executives Club of Fargo Moorhead, and we wanted to collaborate on this project because obviously a vast majority of our members are small business owners, and this act, some clarity to it and some clarification, hopefully from Tom and other legal professionals, can bring some value to them.
Thanks, Kurt. Chris, are you ready? Do you want to make an introduction at all to the North Dakota SBDC?
Chris Irwin, also my colleague Paul Smith, North Dakota SBDC out of Fargo, and happy to be here and seeing how we can help.
Thanks, Chris. Threw you on the spot there because Paul's running a little bit late, but thanks for stepping in. So the Corporate Transparency Act is a new act coming down from the U.S. Department of Treasury, and we're finding out that a lot of business owners haven't heard of this or don't know much about it. So today's event is simply to educate as much as we can with the information that's available and answer questions. Now, as a reminder, today's session is going to be recorded, and we're going to share that recording out. But keep in mind, today is November 14th, 2023, and all this information is subject to change as all of these pieces of legislation become finalized. So with that said, please keep up with the changes as much as you can, and do reach out if you have any future questions. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Tom Kading. He's an attorney at Fargo Patent and Business Law. Tom is an entrepreneur and has a diverse background on all sorts of things, not just business law. But today we're going to hear about business law, and Tom is going to share information about the Corporate Transparency Act. He's going to discuss a little bit more about what it means to you as a business owner and talk through those key components of how to comply and different questions that you might have. We'll take time at the end to do Q&A. So with that said, thanks for joining us, Tom. Take it away.
Excellent. I will share my PowerPoint here. All right, I think everyone can see that at this point. But again, appreciate the introduction, Ian. I get to talk a little bit about the Corporate Transparency Act, and kind of as Ian gave the precursor, it's a new act, so there's a lot of unknown, and some of what I talk about today may change. You know, the Treasury Department, they don't even have the program yet finalized. So it's supposed to be live January 1st, but the software isn't even completed yet. So there certainly could be some changes here in the next couple weeks and couple months even. Corporate transparent or disclaimer, of course, it's educational purposes. So what I want to talk about today, just a little bit about myself, give a brief introduction myself, brief introduction about the law itself, kind of what it is, how it came up, who's impacted, what kind of things need to be reported, what kind of deadlines you have to deal with, how you can actually comply with the law, what does it cost, penalties if you say, hey, I'm just not going to do it, and then finally a few resources that might be helpful. A little bit about myself. As Ian mentioned, I've done more than just law. I've been involved in a variety of ventures. I have a background in engineering. I have my MBA, went on to law school, and got involved in some real estate, some oil and gas, some CBD, some a lot of different projects along the way, cryptocurrency, was involved in the legislature. But ended up practicing law in Fargo patent and business law. And we're a law firm. We work with a lot of small businesses. That's kind of our niche. And, we have 3 divisions. We have our business division, our IP prosecution division, and our business investment side. So that's, kind of a little bit about myself, a little bit about Fargo patent and business law. That's what I do for a career. And that's kind of what the interest or my interest in the law kind of arose, and that's my background. So, Corporate Transparency Act, it was passed back in 2021, and it comes into effect in January 1st, 2024. So it goes into effect in 2 months or a month and a half at this point. And from that date, you have 90 days to comply with the law for the most part. So what is it based on? It's 31 USC 5336. Some of the notable information in it includes, and we'll hear a little bit more about beneficial owner information. What can the government do with that information? And penalties. A couple citations there. It's the law, so it is a code. So the U.S. government passed, the U.S. House and Senate passed the law. And then it was further put under some regulation by the Department of Treasury, and it fell under the FinCEN, I think that's how they say it, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. So that's kind of where it is, who it's regulated by. So one of the things they came out with here in the last couple of weeks is the Small Entity Compliance Guide. And if you've ever read IRS documents, it certainly reminds me of some of the IRS documentation. 56 pages, so there's a fair amount there. Now, first thing to be very clear on, this law is a federal law. It's not a state law. It's not governed by North Dakota. It's not governed by Minnesota or any other state. This is federal law. And you're reporting to the federal government, not the state government. So, sometimes small business can be a little confused. Hey, I filed my LLC with the state. Well, that's not the same as what is required by this law. So you're still going to have your annual filing requirements. Hey, I've got an LLC. You still need to file your annual reports with the state. That doesn't change. That's a totally separate government body. What this law is related to a filing you make with the federal government to report who are the beneficial owners of the company itself. In this law, and we'll get into some of the function of the law, but this law is specifically aimed at small business. So businesses with more than 20 employees generally will not be governed by this particular law. So this is a small business law implemented by the federal government, not the state government. So the first thing, we go over in the law, the first thing we ask is who has to report? And the first step of the analysis is, well, any corporation, any LLC, or similar entity must report as a reporting company to FinCEN. So the catch-all in the statute says, or similar entity. So you might read the statute and say, well, it says LLC, it says corporation, doesn't say LLP or limited partnership or any other PLLC, that sort of thing. But through regulation, for the most part, FinCEN expects to include business trusts, LLPs, LPs, LPs. Not all states have those entities. North Dakota does, and you can utilize those. I don't recall off the top of my head if Minnesota has all those entities. But all of those business entities registered Secretary of State, you do have to register with FinCEN and file your report showing your beneficial information of the owners. Kind of the reason, the government came out and said we needed this information. They cited various national security rules, election integrity. That was kind of the reasoning they referenced, at least in their press releases. So all LLCs, corporations, and other similar entities have to report to the federal government, to FinCEN, but there are some exceptions. And the exceptions are defined within the statute. And I think there's 24 exceptions. And kind of the first bulk of exceptions include a variety of financial organizations. So banks and different lending organizations, for the large part of them, do not have to report under FinCEN. They're exempt from this rule. There's also a variety of other companies, specific organization types that don't have to report. Investment advisors, insurance companies, public accounting firms, pooled investments. And each of these kind of have their own analysis. So it's not like, hey, all of them are exempt. You kind of have to look at a case by case basis. And then the final two that are kind of worth noting, specific organization types are 501c3 or 501cs. That could be a C3, it could be a lot of different things. And then political organizations. So if you're a 501c or a political organization, there's an exception for you. You have to make sure you fit, but there is an exception. Now, the two very important exceptions to keep in mind, and probably the biggest exceptions, are the 20+ employee and the inactive entity. So 20+ employees, to qualify for that, you have to have 5 million in revenue, you have to have 20+ employees, and you have to have an office in the US. If you qualify for that, you're exempt from the statute. Now, that pretty much takes care of most, even a lot of small businesses, obviously all the large businesses, they're all exempted under that particular regulation. If you don't have that 5 million, you don't have an office in the US, or you don't have those 20 employees, you still have to file. The other exemption is inactive entities. So inactive entities do not have to file with FinCEN. There's a couple rules that go with that. Specifically, in the last year, you had to have less than 1,000 in income. You have to not have any ownership change or beneficial owner information change. And beneficial owner is a little bit different than what you'd expect. It includes a couple different categories, not just actual owners of the company. So beneficial owner, who is actually having to get reported? So what happens is, under this rule, any beneficial owner of a company must be registered. And what I mean by registered is the company must file a report and file the names and addresses and identification of each beneficial owner. So it's as simple as that. You have to register with the federal government, the FinCEN, exactly who are those beneficial owners in a particular company. So what is a beneficial owner? Beneficial owner really falls into a couple different categories. One, 25% ownership interest. And that can come in many different forms. It can come in, equity. It can come in different ways people get paid, but 25% ownership interest. So if you own 25% of the business, you automatically qualify that you have to be registered with FinCEN. So that's the first requirement. The second one is who has substantial control of the business. And that might be a member manager, it might be an owner, it might be a 2% owner of the business, but they substantially control the business. It might be a general partner of a business. They own a very small percentage, but they have substantial control of the business. Now, one piece that group of people that got lumped into this beneficial owner group is the C-suite. So the CEO, the CFO, the president, and so forth. There's a list of employee types that if you're that employee type, regardless if you own 0% or 100%, if you are the CEO or CFO of a company, and there's a list of them, it's more than just those two, but if you're in that C-suite, you have to be reported to FinCEN as a beneficial owner. So you could have, you know, you could be the CFO and you own 0%, you're just a hired W-2 employee, you have to be reported to FinCEN. Now, this other group, substantial influence. So people who have substantial influence over a business must also be reported. And that's kind of a catch-all. And what the regulation says is if you have a substantial influence over the business operation, the finances, or the structure of a business, you should be reported. Now, another category of people who have to be reported to FinCEN are the applicants. So if you set up a business, you have to be reported as the applicant. Now, that's only for entities organized after January 1st, 2024. So if you set up your business 10 years ago, you don't have to go and report the applicant who set that entity up. There are a variety of exceptions for who is reported. So let's say, you know, someone in the company, one of the owners owns 50% of the business, but that particular person is a minor. You don't have to report that person. That person falls into an exception. There are a couple other exceptions, including creditors and a couple other minor things. What is reported? So you figure out who the beneficial owners are. You say, hey, this is who has substantial control of my business. This is who owns 25% of the business. What do you have to report when you have to file that report with FinCEN? Well, first off, you have to report what is the company, basic information, trade name, legal name, EIN, address. You have to report for the people, you know, date of birth, name. You have to produce an ID. One of the other things people can do is they can go out and they can apply for a FinCEN number. It's a unique identifier. At this point, FinCEN is not requiring that you obtain a FinCEN number. Whether that changes in the future, I guess, who knows? But at this point, FinCEN is not requiring that you get your FinCEN number. In place of submitting your name, date of birth, address, and ID, you can apply for a FinCEN number and simply submit the FinCEN number. So timing, there's three components of timing. So you own a business, you're going into 2024 and you say, hey, I want to be in compliance. Well, how much time do I have to do it? So come January 1st, 2024, you have 90 days to comply. So within those 90 days, the law says you're going to have to file this report with FinCEN listing the beneficial owners and the beneficial owner information. That's your initial report. So that's for businesses in existence prior to January 1st, 2024. Now, there are entities that are going to be formed after January 1st, 2024, and those businesses have 30 days to comply. So the other situation you're going to run into is what happens when I have a business and I have a change of ownership. I have, you know, a change of beneficial owner information, whatever it might be. You have to file a new report with FinCEN within 30 days. So one kind of wrinkle here is you own a small business, and every time a new person in the C-suite is brought on or leaves, you have to file a new report. And so you hire a new CFO, you hire a new president, that means you have to report with FinCEN that person's information. Let's say the CFO's address changes, they move from Fargo to West Fargo or Fargo to Moorhead or whatever it might be. That's a change of information and you must file a new report with FinCEN within 30 days. So this will become part of the process if you're hiring, firing some of those people in the C-suite. what's the government do with this information? Government, multiple agencies can get a hold of this information. And as noted before, the government says they're going to use it for law enforcement, financial crimes, various national security, homeland security type issues. So who per the statute can get the information? First statutorily allowed group that gets the information is federal agencies. So federal agencies, for the purpose of security, law enforcement, and intelligence, can obtain this FinCEN information without a court order. So if they want it and they follow the proper procedures, they can get it. They do not need a court order. Now, state agencies can also get that information, but they do need a court order. So if, you know, a North Dakota agency wants that information per the statute, you need a court order. Now, foreign agencies, foreign governments, I should say, can also get the information if they work with U.S. federal agencies to obtain it. So if U.S. federal agency can request on behalf of a foreign government that information, there's a set of pretty specific procedures and rules that apply when that foreign government asks for that information. So a hostile foreign government, North Korea, could not request FinCEN information and get it. Now, the fourth one, this is kind of an interesting one, I thought, is financial institutions. Financial institutions can request information as a part of due diligence for certain financial compliance. So banks, financial institutions, they can get this information. And I fully expect, and I guess time will tell, that, you know, banks are certainly going to want to try to grab this information and use this information as part of their due diligence procedure for various loans. And federal regulators can get the information. So agencies that regulate a specific activity can get the information, again, without a warrant or without a court order. So how to file? To be determined. They have not, FinCEN has not yet completed the online platform. They say it's going to be ready by January 1st. I guess if it isn't, I imagine they'll postpone the implementation of this, but the platform is not live. One of the things that is kind of pushed out there, FinCEN is not going to reach out to people and request that they file their report for 2024 or any other year, at least for what they say right now. And so if someone is reaching out and saying, hey, I'm the government, go file your report with me, get it done, that's likely a scam. So I imagine that there are going to be plenty of scammers out there trying to use the implementation of this new law to trick business owners into, you know, doing certain activities. So it's something to be aware of. Cost. Right now, there's no filing fee. If you go and file your FinCEN report here in 2024 and you file it in compliance and you get it put away correctly, there are no current filing fees. The statute doesn't prohibit filing fees, and maybe they change that in the future, I don't know. One of the things FinCEN did come out with, and I don't know if it'll be accurate or not, I don't think it'd be accurate if you hire an attorney, but they estimate that the private cost to, you know, complete the FinCEN report is $85. So penalty. What happens if you're like, hey, I just don't want to file this with the government? I don't want to do it. So the statutory law allows for two things. It allows for both criminal and civil penalties. It allows for up to a $10,000 fine and 2 years in prison. I pretty much, I doubt that people will be prosecuted and sent to prison simply over not filing this, but that is the statute. What the statute allows for is $500 a day for not being in compliance with this particular law. And the law also states, actually, I think it's regulation states that senior officers of a company may be held accountable. And what that means, I mean, that certainly could be interpreted as liable for the cash penalties, perhaps liable for the 2 years in prison. But those are the penalties that are pushed out there right now as potentials for not complying with this law. So references, again, just a couple references. There's a brochure, there's a fact sheet. If you go to the Department of Treasury website, FinCEN website, you're going to be able to see a variety of resources. How do you, based on who needs to file, how do you file, what's the law? Here's some small business compliance sheets if you have questions. It does walk you through the 56-page guide does kind of walk you through how to go through the analysis in terms of who needs to register, what needs to be registered, what are the exceptions. So it is helpful in that regard. So definitely look that up if you're trying to figure out how to comply with this law. With that, I think that wraps up everything from kind of the Corporate Transparency Act. I'd be happy to answer any questions. This, is a new law, so there's certainly some unknowns and certainly some untested areas, but in a nutshell, this is kind of what it is. It applies to small business. It requires you to file information with the federal government, not the state government, federal government, to notify who the beneficial owner is. So happy to answer questions.
Thank you for all that, Tom. Thank you. That's a lot of information. So for folks that have any questions, feel free to get ready with your questions or drop them in the chat. I'm going to kick us off with the first question. Tom, you mentioned that the U.S. Treasury Department or no other government agency is going to be tracking you down, asking you to register, right? So it's kind of people's responsibility to educate themselves on this. Where would you say is the best place for somebody to look up, if they have any questions? Does the federal government have an info page on this, or where would people turn if they have more questions?
I would go to, I'd go right to the federal government, Department of Treasury. I'd go to FinCEN.gov, and they're going to have a variety of information there telling you how do you comply with the law. So, there's a million websites out there on terms of what is the Corporate Transparency Act, but go straight to FinCEN. That's going to give you, pretty good information. And that's where ultimately you're most likely going to have to register as well. So there, at some point, whenever they come out with the software, I imagine they're going to have that link somewhere on this page saying, hey, come register right here.
Great, thank you. We've got a question in the chat. What if somebody has an LLC for agriculture and they are the only person who's involved in the LLC? Would they need to register?
I would expect they would. At this point, there are no exceptions for agriculture. So if you have an LLC, it's filed with the state, you're going to have to go out and register that unless you fall into an exception.
Thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to ask your question that way too. Got a question in the chat here. Is regarding that last question, is that same assumption true for S Corps then?
Yes, that would be true. So an S Corp, if you're under the 20 employee count, you're going to have to be registering with the government, and you're going to have to be registering those beneficial owners, which, as we recall, include both the owners and also those beneficial owners, including the C Corp or the C-suite and some of those other individuals.
So I got one other question, or maybe a point of clarification here. So companies that are created before January 1st, 2024, So companies already created or created until the end of this year, is that they have until January 1, 2025 to comply with this, right?
I believe the initial reporting time is 90 days.
90 days. Okay.
Yeah.
One more question here from Chris. Do you expect that this will fall into the realm of CPA services, or do you think companies will have to arrange registration separately or with another party?
I would kind of wonder if CPAs would be, a good party to do this registration. I guess it's ultimately down to, what do CPAs want to do in this regard? I'm sure attorneys would be happy to do this registration. CPAs, so the first 90 days, that's going to fall right into tax season for them. So there might be less of a motivation, but I could certainly see, it being up CPAs alleys. I could see attorneys doing it. If you have a PEO, I kind of wonder if PEO services are going to be a provider for this particular activity.
All right. Any other questions from the audience? I got one more question here. Oh, that was the same question as before. Any other questions from the audience?
And this is Christine. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. So you stated that you can get the FinCEN number rather than providing like the personal data. If somebody were looking at the information, if they have the FinCEN number, they can get at the personal data anyway, correct?
Yes, that should be correct. The challenge, of course, will be this information is available kind of under those 5 groups of people. The government, financial or federal agencies, they'll be able to get that information. The FinCEN number might be a convenience thing. It might be an activity that allows you to file quicker, maybe hide the information from other parties in the business. But ultimately, yes, the government will have access to that information.
Thank you. One other quick question. There is no way, that this is not going to go through, correct? It might get pushed back a little bit if they're not ready to actually take it, but it will not get overturned by any way, will it?
At this point, it's passed Congress. So Congress has passed it. It's passed through some regulatory process, and now it's kind of in the implementation stage. I fully expect this is going to get litigated, under, is this a state power activity? Is this an activity that's allowable by the federal government? So I do expect that there will be litigation. I'm not aware of any pending, cases that are going to go up to the Supreme Court. Could it get overturned? It certainly could. But as of now, it's going to be implemented January 1st.
Thank you.
I have a question, Tom.
Absolutely.
So I'm assuming that the filing is going to be required from the corporation, not from an individual. So in the case of yourself, myself, many of our members own multiple LLCs and corporations. You'll have to do a filing with each one. It wouldn't be Kurt McSparren filing the report and listing my LLCs and corporations, but I have to do one for each corporation, I assume.
That's my understanding as to how it's going to be implemented. It's the company is responsible to file the report with FinCEN. Now the caveat, of course, is if you're an executive or a manager and there's three owners or 3 members of a company, if the company doesn't file it, it's very likely that you're going to be liable or accountable to file that report.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just thinking about small business owners missing a company here and there. A lot of them have little LLCs set up that aren't hardly used. So it'll be a task to go through and check all the boxes, make sure they got everything hit. I know several of our members that have well over a dozen different LLCs.
Yeah, and I think it's gonna be, you know, once you get those numbers in place, you have a couple of entities, it's gonna be easy to overlook things, you know, if you don't, you gotta update things after you change addresses, change members, change ownership. So there are certainly some compliance issues that you have to jump through hoops on.
And I guess we wait and see whether after that 90 days, the $500 a day just starts ticking in the background without a business owners knowing that's happening, or whether they're going to be notified that they missed the filing and get time to get that in. I guess we wait and see.
You know, the kind of the research I've done so far, I don't really have a clear indication as to how are they gonna actually enforce this? And are they gonna notify people? Are they gonna, you know, get a list of state entities, LLCs in North Dakota and say, hey, yeah, this is the list that didn't file, we better check with them. So I don't know how they're gonna implement that. The $500 a day, my understanding is it's not automatic tolling of fines.
Yeah. But I would imagine that will be a green light to a lot of scammers, like you had indicated too. Business owners will be getting letters, phone calls, or emails saying, hey, you forgot to file, you owe X thousands of dollars, send money to this address or send us your credit card information. So business owners will have to be on the lookout for the upcoming scams related.
I think that's absolutely coming. You know, anytime, you know, we register something with the federal government or state, sometimes it's not as prevalent with the state, but anytime you file a trademark or a patent, you know, our customer gets a letter in the mail from some scammer saying, hey, you owe us this fee. And it's a scam. And I think the same thing is going to happen with this. Absolutely.
Along those lines, Tom, how can people protect themselves? What questions can they ask and who can they ask them to if they're not sure?
Well, I think, you know, I imagine SBDC, EDC, you know, any of them would, I'm guessing would be happy to at least have a conversation. You know, we're, as attorneys, we're always happy to talk to people. You know, if one of my clients come forward and say, hey, we've got an issue, we've got a question, did I comply? No, yes, you may or may not have. But I get emails all the time from people who say, hey, I got this in the mail, is this legit? And I can usually give a no, that's not legit, or yes, you need to do something. But we'd be happy to talk to anyone if they have an issue with filing, or they don't know who is a beneficial owner or isn't, or whether they have to even file. We're happy to walk through it with them.
Thanks so much, Tom. Did that answer everyone's questions? A lot of good questions today. Thanks so much for this information, Tom, and thanks for taking the time to prepare all this for our audience. And for our audience, thanks for joining us today. Please take a moment to fill out the survey that you'll receive sometime today. That survey helps us continue to provide info sessions and workshops for free and no cost to you. So, and if you have any other questions or anything come up after today's webinar that you forgot to ask, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we'll get you connected to the right answer, or Tom or somebody that can help answer that question. Well, that's all we've got for today. Thanks for joining us, folks.
Thank you, Tom.